Hello. I'm filming this on my iPad, so I'm kind of scared because the screen is much bigger than what I'm used to. But, yeah, I'm just gonna go through and answer these questions about what I've learned on the study abroad trip and from seeing the art and all of the monuments and different things, the architecture that we saw and experienced abroad. What is the difference in art and non-art? The difference between art and non-art, I think, can to an extent be left up to perception. The way I define art is anything created by a person to express a thing, or that expresses a purpose. Some monuments, like de Arc de Triomphe, that's not a fantastic example, hold on. Monuments like Westminster Abbey, different huge churches, were built and designed by a person for the purpose of representing their religion. They were expressing their dedication and their devotion to their religion, to their creator, to what they believed as their end-all, be-all, their purpose for existence. Other pieces of art, like the Rothko Room, that was at the Tate Modern, were expressions of an emotion. Rothko was trying to express and induce in others serenity and calmness and introspective thinking, which really didn't work for me. All I got was stressed out, but the purpose was there. And because of my reaction to that emotion, art is also something or anything that a person can react to. Something created to invoke emotion that evokes a reaction from the person watching or the person listening or the person experiencing. I experienced the Rothko Room and got stressed out. That's probably not what Rothko designed it to be, but that's what happened. I experienced the Eiffel Tower, in itself an art piece. An art piece because it broke boundaries. I experienced euphoria. I had a bit of Call to the Void as well, but that's something completely different. So the difference between art and non-art is what can be experienced, is what the person takes from it, and what the artist meant to give to the viewer or the experiencer in creating that art. How is seeing art in person instead of in a book different to you? 'Cause it's real. We read about things that happened in history, places where they happened. We're like, oh, that must be cool, that must be great. But there's some sort of disconnect because we're not there, because all we get to do is read about it. Seeing the Venus de Milo made it seem so much more real. It made it so much more awe-inspiring. Seeing all of these stone statues, we got to see up close the amount of detail and craftsmanship that was put into them. And so it made it more impressive because we got to see it and experience it at a more up-close level. It made it more real because we were there. It was close enough for us to touch. Like Versailles is this legendary palace that people hold up to this huge standard, and seeing it made it so much more real. A lot of it became so much more magnificent. It also put a lot of things into context. Hearing and reading about Versailles is one thing, but seeing Versailles and being in Versailles puts into context just how hard the Bourbon House was hit during the French Revolution, because we got to see a lot of the empty rooms, the things that were missing, the things that got pillaged, the things that got melted and sold for wars. So we got to see a lot of the history age and disappear almost by being in that building. So it just puts things into context more. It makes things seem more real. And in a lot of cases more impressive, like anything made of stone. A lot of the art pieces we saw, a lot of the art from the early 19th century 19th century, early 20th century, where they were using the dot technique. Looked a lot more impressive in person than it did in a picture. And it makes things seem more real. Question number 3. What do you think people risking their lives for some of the art you witnessed? A lot of the art we witnessed is history. A lot of the art and the artifacts that we saw, we wouldn't know things about that era or about our past as a species if we didn't have those art pieces. So I think it's, needless to say, incredibly noble. But I also think it's incredibly necessary. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's worthwhile, worthy cause. Aside from human rights, the environment, and the survival of the human race, one of the worthiest causes. Because the arts have such an importance to our humanity and to our history, especially art pieces like the Rosetta Stone. It's an artifact, but it also is something that someone put time and work into in order to help us understand multiple different languages. And without people risking their lives for artifacts like that, we wouldn't know how to read a hieroglyphic. We wouldn't know anything about the history of that time. We wouldn't understand any of the monuments from that time. It's incredibly important, and it just makes me realize, when you think about when people go into war, when dictators come into power, we've heard this many a time, but the arts are always the first thing to go. And that is in itself a statement of how important the arts are to our society and to our history. Because without the arts, without art makers, we don't have anyone expressing the feeling of the time. We don't have anyone expressing the underdog, other than people who can very easily be painted as radical political opponents. It's the artists that humanize us. It's the arts that make us realize and see and feel the truth of a lot of situations. So without the artists and without the art they create, we as a species would be lost if we aren't already. But we would for sure be lost. So I think it's fantastic that people risk their lives for art, but I don't think they should have to, because I think the human race should understand how important art is. Explain the moments you experienced wonder. A lot of the moments I experienced wonder were, like I mentioned about Versailles, things that I'd heard about, things that I'd read about that didn't seem real, and then experiencing them just was awe-inspiring to me. Walking through any palace, the Louvre, Versailles, the churches, Westminster, I had this feeling of being connected to that history. When I saw the wooden throne that was built in the 11th century no, it was built in the 13th century. I had my numbers wrong. But it was built in the 13th century at Westminster. And knowing that how many royals had been crowned, had their coronations done on that throne, that all of that history, all of the people who had sat on that throne, the entire meaning of that throne was standing 15 feet in front of me. Standing in that building, I stood 5 feet away from Elizabeth Tudor's bones. It's just magnificent how close we got to be to those centers of culture, those centers of history. Those magnificent works of art like the Venus de Milo, standing so close to that construction. The reality of all of it just struck me to the floor, so to speak. Like the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower were they say they're monuments, but they were huge. Just the impressive feat of architecture it took to construct those kind of things was amazing. Some of the wonder in the churches we went to, St. Paul's, Westminster, Sainte-Chapelle, came from standing in that building and knowing that it was people on tall ladders with picks, with hammers and picks and paintbrushes, and that's it. Just how much work and how much time and how much dedication it would have taken to build something like that. Absolutely, I was awestricken. It floored me. Also thinking about, especially with those churches and those palaces, think about a time when those were the only buildings that stood above maybe 3 stories, and how much that fear of God must have been instilled in people. The fear of God, the fear of the monarchs. It put in perspective for me why people were so would fight for Christianity, would fight for monarchs so easily, because even if they didn't 100% wholeheartedly agree with them, or even if they weren't sure about their religion, because of the culture and because of things like the way the monuments stood that made those the people they represented seem so much higher and more powerful than the common man, would have been very easily to get someone else to fight for them, and I see that. Next question. How do you think this trip and your experience has affected your future self? Why? I've been to Europe several times before, and I saw a lot of the things I did, but this time was the first time that I got to experience a lot of it by myself as an adult, instead of being overly chaperoned or with my family. And it did 2 things for me. One, it showed me how human and how similar a lot of the things we do in these cities are. But it also showed me how different the history is. And even if European culture can be that different from American culture, what must it be like in other places around the world? And it really put into perspective for me that we for sure, like I already live by this, but now I for sure do. People come from such different backgrounds that prejudgments of anybody and anyone's past don't serve us at all, especially if they're coming from a different country where the history and the cultures are so wildly different from our own. We have to be conscious of that in interacting with those people and those different cultures, because if we're not, we cross lines, we make enemies, and we just are being bad humans and bad fellow global citizens. But yeah, being abroad made me really realize how different our culture is, and how social events have evolved differently from ours, especially in the case of things like organized racism. Our government has a lot of policies that are still inherently geared to oppress minorities. And seeing the interaction of people in Europe and speaking to, Broderick and I met French sisters in Europe on the bridge when we were making boat people do the Macarena. And one of them had studied in Chicago, near Chicago in Iowa, and she said it was fascinating how in America it was obvious that people were kind of sectioned off into their own groups and own factions, and she said that in Europe that doesn't happen. So I don't know if that's a difference in policy or a difference in social climate or both, but it kind of put in perspective for me that among developed countries, while America offers a lot of rights and privileges and freedoms, our social climate is a little dated, and that needs to change. It's affected my drive for the future. Include a video or still images of your scrapbook. So here's video. Scrapbook. What do I still have? Okay, let's see. We've got my Oyster card. Ooh, so fun. This was cool. Getting around London in the subway was very easy. I really enjoyed London. London's subway was also fantastic. Souvenir. Here we go. On my free day, I saw everybody's talking about Jamie on the West End and bought the script. Found my audition monologue for Generals this semester. Yup. And if we go a little more, let's see. At Westminster, I bought, oh no, I put that book, it's over here. At Westminster, I bought a book about the kings and queens of England because I'm fascinated with European monarchy. Absolutely fascinated. As much as I talk about social and political change, if I get any political power in this country, I'm going to somehow manage to turn it into a monarchy. From Versailles, I have a pen with King Louis's Sun King logo on it that my father is going to engrave upon. And I also have this book from Versailles, the kings of France and their wives, because there weren't any independent queens in France, unfortunately. All of the primary monarchs in France were kings, except for when Catherine de Medici served as queen regent. She did a bunch of things, including expand the Palace of the Louvre. Yes, good for her. And I know that somewhere around here, I have tickets. Maybe it's in this bag of documents that I kept. Program of the Merry Wives of Windsor. Yup, and here's my Merry Wives of Windsor ticket. I'm excellent at scrapbooking, if you can't tell. Ha ha ha. And then we have, I got a newspaper because I thought it was really funny that Theresa May resigned in May. So here's my I've done all I can Theresa May crying tabloid. That's funny. This is a ticket, but I don't know what it's for. Oh, Churchill War Rooms. That was great. What's this? Westminster Abbey. Ooh, it's that's the Evensong we went to where they played a lot of modern renditions of things, like the Magnificat was written between like in the late 19th century. So they were using a lot of more modern chords that wouldn't have been used in the time Westminster Abbey was first going. So I thought that was cool. We have Romeo and Juliet at the Royal Opera House because that was cool. That was so good. Girl, those white tights hide absolutely nothing. And I was not mad about that. Their legs and other things looked fantastic in those. Grange Hotels paper. Sure, that will be useful at some point. Not actually sure why I kept it, though. BBC Singers concert. Singers at 6. And more paper from the Grange Hotel. I also kept one of those drink toppers. 2 of them, actually. Kept those. Because those are fun. Hope you didn't get charged for those. You shouldn't have. But St. Paul's Evensong program. Wow, I kept a lot. My Everybody's Talking About Jamie ticket. Oh, I sat in the orchestra. It was so good. Wow. Wow, that was actually fantastic. Choral Evensong at St. Martin in the Fields. Although if you have to cut one, cut this one. Because it was cool. But compared to Westminster and St. Paul's, it was like, ooh. It's like the when you order it online versus when you buy it memes. Oh, and those are pictures, the photocopies of my personal information. Yeah, so... and my last piece of my scrapbook is my survival guide. It was a really fun trip. I really did enjoy it. I've had a ball. Yeah, and there we have it. That's all I've got. So thank you for taking us on this trip. Thank you for planning this for us. Thank you for getting Miriam, because she was an icon. And also, okay, story. So I've been working New Student Orientation, selling my soul to New Student Orientation. And after advising, we have to help them log into their Bobcat email addresses. And so many students have already gotten the email to pre-register for next year. And I think it's so funny that Nico is sending that out so early. But also, yeah, love that. I've been telling my orientees that it's fantastic and that they should go on it. So I hope they all consider it and they all apply. Thanks! Good luck next year. Hope to see you around campus. Au revoir.